So we are going to keep the videos this way. I don't think the other way worked. So I apologize about the last video kind of being a little wonky recorded. Let me share this. And there we go. Okay. Excuse me. Alrighty, so this is going to be part 3 of chapter 11. Sorry, I have like a bunch of snacks for my son because he was awake, and sometimes he gets antsy, and so snacks, he's always hungry, and so I just keep like a ton of little snacks and just feed him. So that's what I did for the last video. Anyways, my husband came home, so now I just have a bunch of trash everywhere that I need to clean. But we'll get right into it. Again, I'll be uploading these onto YouTube. My YouTube is Strength Over Fear. Just Strength Over Fear. And YouTube. Alrighty, a new technique for suturing the uterus after cesarean. Another fashion of the latest decade or so is not a pharmaceutical product, but rather a new surgical method. A new surgical technique for stitching the uterus after cesarean surgery has come into vogue in the United States, sometimes called the Misgav-Ladick method. The technique calls for stitching the uterine incision in one layer instead of the traditional for stitching the uterine incision in one layer. Instead of the traditional 2 layers. Sorry. For most OBs in the English-speaking industrialized world, hi Jojo. The 2-layer method of closure has been the standard of care for some 75 years. Most of our statistics for uterine rupture and certain placental abnormalities, which happen more frequently after a previous cesarean section, are based upon the traditional way of sewing up the uterus. At an annual conference of the National Association of Childbearing Centers in 1999, Dr. Kurt Benschirk, a renowned pathologist and textbook author, warned that the new fashion of single-layer closure and possibly the change during the same time period from suturing with silk to suturing with removable catgut was a probable cause of a dramatic increase in the incidence of life-threatening placental problems he had observed in recent years. He remarked that he had encountered about 10 cases of placenta proscrita per year for 3 consecutive years at a San Diego Metropolitan Hospital, an extraordinarily high incidence for what has previously been known as extremely rare complication, 1 in every 12,500 births. Before moving to San Diego, where single-layer suturing had become the preferred method, he had never before in a long career encountered this complication. Women with placenta proscrita are in grave danger of bleeding to death because the placenta has grown over the uterine scar and through the bare uterine connective tissue, with no regeneration of the muscle layer in that area, sometimes into other organs such as the bladder. In normal cases, the placenta embeds itself in the lining with the uterus, but not into the uterine muscle or connective tissue itself. Dr. Bernish is not the only professional to notice the increasing incidence of placenta proscrita in the United States. Dr. Rebecca Bernigan A New York City pathologist told me that she sees one placenta prurita a month at a hospital where she works. There appear to be more possible problems with a single layer suturing. A monitorial study, 2,142 women, compared to the new method with the old and found that 4 times the higher risk of uterine rupture with single layer method, and the authors of the study concluded, considering the widespread of the use of single layer closure, it is apparent impact on the later uterine rupture. It is urgent for important for others to investigate this relationship. Given the comparable short-term morbidity with single layer and double layer closures, surgeons should consider using a double layer closure technique for women who may experience subsequent trial of labor. The publication of this study is most preliminary form was enough for the chairman of maternal fetal medicine at Yale and New Haven Hospital Center, Yale New Haven Hospital Center, to announce the single layer closure of the uterus should be abandoned until there is more convincing evidence for its safety. OBs have informed me that 4 cases of maternal deaths that are directly attributable to single layer suturing. In 3 cases, death came in the near pregnancy. In 1, there was bleeding at the incision site after surgery. During a recent internet chat room discussion among OBs, gynecologists, general surgeons doing gynecology from many parts of the world, a U.S. OB remarked that a small rural hospital that preferred to his large teaching hospital suddenly began sending them problem cases of bleeding and failure of healing. These cases mystified him and his colleagues at the larger hospital until the rural hospital informed them of their change in technique to single layer closure. When they changed back to double layer closure, there was no further trouble with bleeding problems and failure of the incision to heal. Aware of all of this, I began asking physician friends about the new suturing method, and learned that it is now taught in many U.S. medical schools. In preference to the traditional method, many OBs have not had much experience in suturing the uterus in layers, and money-conscious health maintenance organizations, HMOs, clearly prefer surgeons who sew up in 5 minutes to those who require 10 or more. Repairing the uterus in layers takes longer. One thing that is abundantly clear: the reasons have nothing to do with solid evidence, for almost no studies have been done to assess the safety of single-layer uterine suturing. The Cochrane Database of Systematic Reviews, 2000, found only 2 studies meeting their criteria for evaluating surgical procedures and drugs, and these studies involved just 382 women who had a single layer closure. Both studies found that the new method saves 4 to 5 minutes per operation, but neither study was large enough to use as evidence for its safety, especially on a question so important as maternal deaths. At the same time that the research community in medical schools ignored the trend towards single-layer suturing, 2 widely read giveaway marketing publications, Contemporary OBGYN and OB management discussed the new method in glowing terms. One concentrated on method, while the other claimed that single-layer sutures prevents blood loss, promotes better wound healing, and causes less pain. By failing to study the outcomes of the next pregnancy, each article completely ignored the possibility of harm to the women it involved. I know many good doctors who have sutured the uterus in one layer. Most of them are busy people who generally have little time to spend in medical libraries carefully parsing articles. Most have not necessarily been taught to distinguish between clever marketing and science, and critical reading is not a skill that is well taught in many medical schools. How likely is it that critical reading of this kind is encouraged in medical schools where residents are pressured to stitch the uterus in an experimental way without women's knowledge or consent? Practically speaking, it is not really hard to guess why the new cesarean technique is so quickly came into vogue in the United States during the 1990s. Policy decisions here often hinge more on economic factors than what is best for public health. Most of the few studies that have measured any outcome following single layer closure have agreed that less structure material is required. Operating room time is significantly reduced, and there is sometimes a shorter hospital stay for women with single layer closure. All of these factors at least point to the cost savings for HMOs and hospitals, if not greater safety for women undergoing cesarean surgery. My recommendations to pregnant women, at least in the United States, it is to specify that you should need a cesarean. You want your uterus to be closed in 2 layers. If you have already had a cesarean and you're pregnant again, make sure that your placenta is not overlying your previous uterine scar before you attempt vaginal birth after cesarean. The good news is that British research group, the National Perinatal Epidemiology Unit in Oxford, is coordinating a multi-center trial of cesarean surgery techniques that plans to address this relatively unstudied issue. Cesarean section told by choice, the untold story. So we will read that tomorrow. I don't know, or should I just... Yeah, I'll upload this one and then I'll come back on and read this one. And then I'll just get those 3 out today, because tomorrow is Christmas Eve, right? And then the next day will be Christmas Day. So, and I don't think I'll be posting on here as much, like educational stuff, maybe like personal things, but I won't be going live and stuff like that. So I'll upload this and then I'll do the next one. You guys have a good one.